Hi, I'm Jane King Hession, author of Elizabeth Shoy Close, A Life in Modern Architecture, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Architecture in America has been a profession dominated by white people, and that has been changing slowly, very slowly. Guess what year the first black woman got an architecture license in our fine state of North Carolina? 1950? 1970? No, it was 1990. Today, we welcome author and photographer Janna Ireland with a new book out on the most famous black architect of the 20th century, Paul Williams, plus that pioneering architect from 1990 we were just talking about, the one from North Carolina, Danita Brown. And now, someone with no architectural training nor licensure whatsoever, your host, George Smart.
Hi, folks. If you've been following our Instagram feeds on US Modernist or Mr. Modernism, you know that for months we've been giving away architecture books and gift cards every single day. Just like 1990s FM radio, all you have to do is be the first caller generally when the posts go up on Instagram. These calls go directly to me, and I love talking to people. And people love these books. Even devoted classicists are thrilled to win. And for many, it's the first time they've won anything. It's a really interesting thing that's starting to happen, that these winners are asking if they can donate their coffee table style books that they love but no longer want and can't bear to throw away. And the answer is yes. You can ship those to us, we'll even pay for the shipping, and then we will in turn give those to new loving owners all around the country. Plus, you can get a great tax deduction. To learn more, write me at george@usmodernist.org. Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Modernist Realtor Angela Roll.
In our continuing world of make-believe, modernist realtor Angela Roll was raised on a secluded modernist island in the Amazon, populated only by immortal warrior women with impeccable architectural taste. When architect Le Corbusier crashes his plane into this paradise, Princess Diana is too busy teaching a soul cycle class and sends Angela to deal with him. Le Corbusier, after ranting in French about how Americans have no style,
Mon Dieu,
encourages Angela to leave the all-female sanctuary to enter the cynical world of gabled roofs and men for the first time. Ever since on a mission to defend modernism, Angela deals with unreasonable sellers, unrealistic buyers, incompetent builders, and bureaucratic city councils, while hoping to unlock the potential superpower of modernism the world has yet to fully appreciate. Modernist realtor Angela Roll is your superheroine. Reach her at angelaroll.com, that's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. Author and photographer Janna Ireland graduated from NYU and UCLA, and her work has been shown around the world, including solo exhibitions in LA, San Francisco, New Orleans, and Chicago. She's been published in Aperture, The New Yorker, Harper's, Art Papers, Vice, and the Los Angeles Times. And her new book regarding Paul R. Williams, A Photographer's View, was recently published by the Angel City Press. Welcome, Janna.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And as Tom mentioned earlier, it was not until 1990 that Danita Brown became the first black woman licensed to practice architecture in North Carolina. She was one of the first 30 in the entire United States. Danita graduated from Clemson University with 2 degrees and interned with Harvey Gantt, who was the first black student to enroll at Clemson in 1963. He was also the first black candidate for U.S. Senate in North Carolina and the first architect from the state to run for major office. With 25 years and more of experience working for firms and on her own in community development, design, planning, and historic preservation, Danita has led projects in the Charlotte and Atlanta areas, plus projects for the National Park Service in Cultural Resources, Partnerships, and Science Division. She's currently the chairman of the Atlanta Board of Zoning Adjustment. Welcome, Danita.
Thank you.
Danita, I have to ask before we get started, what exactly is the Atlanta Board of Zoning Adjustment? What kind of magical powers do you have on that group?
Well, we have property rights in this country, which is really important. But we also have zoning laws. And what this board does for the properties within the city of Atlanta, we assist property owners in having cases heard for variances or special exceptions on appeals of city departments that allow them to do what they would like to do on their property within the zoning ordinance. So it's really like a board of zoning adjustment.
Now, are you the final say in that decision, or can they appeal it?
Well, this board is a quasi-judicial board. So it's one of the boards of the city where it is the final decision. And so if we do not accept it, then they can appeal to the Superior Court of the state. So, it's one of those boards where it's a final decision because we're quasi-judicial. It is appointed by, the membership is appointed by the city council and the mayor's office with different varying expertise to hear such cases.
So, Danita, if I want to put my muffler shop next to an elementary school, I'm going to probably end up talking to you?
In some ways, yes, unless it's a zoning review board. So, yes. But, you wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, you'd have to go to muffler school first, George.
I would have to go to muffler
I think
school.
so.
We are living in a time where black people are demanding justice and where white people, at least more so than last year, are admitting that there is systemic racism that black people have coexisted with in this country since we started the country. America has a lot of things going for it, but correcting for a history of slavery and marginalization is not one of them. This has affected nearly every profession, and architecture is no exception. Although nearly 40% of new architects are women, and over half of those are people of color, you'd think that with the civil rights movement of the 60s, the expansion of scholarships and educational opportunities, and the stated openness of the AIA towards diversity, well, how bad can it still be? Pretty bad, turns out. Still, only 2% of the approximately 113,000 U.S. licensed architects are black, and women make up approximately 0.3% of that number. One architect who has inspired young practitioners of all races is Paul Williams of Los Angeles. Tom, tell our listeners a little bit about Paul Williams.
Well, Paul Revere Williams was born in Los Angeles in 1894. Over the course of his architectural career, he designed nearly 2,000 homes, most of them traditional but some modernist, especially in Palm Springs, California. When he began his independent practice in the early 1920s, he focused on affordable housing, but he quickly scaled up to large estates for affluent and celebrity clients and to public buildings. Some of his more famous clients included Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, Barron Hilton, and Frank Sinatra. His public buildings inside the Palm Springs Tennis Center, built in 1946 and designed with A. Quincy Jones, and a few years later he was also involved and responsible for a renovation of the Beverly Hills Hotel. 8 of Williams' structures are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. He was the first black architect in America to become a member of the AIA, and later the first black AIA member to be inducted into the Institute's College of Fellows. Williams was posthumously awarded the AIA's 2017 Gold Medal, the profession's highest national honor for lasting influence on the theory and practice of architecture. You can see our archive of his residential work at www.usmodernist.org/pwilliams.
Thank you, Tom. Janna, let's start with you. How did you discover Paul Williams?
I discovered Paul Williams through the architect Barbara Bester.
One of our guests on the show, yes.
Oh, I didn't realize
she's
you had
lovely.
Barbara on. That's wonderful. She is lovely. And she runs the Julia Schulman Institute at Woodbury University and has an interest in work that's about architecture and architectural photography. So she wanted someone to do some work about Paul Williams. And my name came up in a conversation she had with a former professor of mine, James Welling.
And when was this?
This was in the summer of 2016.
So it was right before the AIA announcement, which I believe was in December of that year for the 2017 medal.
Okay. So was this going to be a exhibition, or were they commissioning a book, or what were they asking you to do?
They wanted someone to do an exhibition for the gallery that Woodbury University has in Hollywood, the WUHO Gallery. So I spent about a year and a half working towards this exhibition, and I ended up enjoying the work so much and wanting to continue it. And the book is something that came later and separately.
Is the installation still around, or did it close?
It closed. It was just, exhibitions usually run something like 6 to 8 weeks. So that was just something that ran from the end of 2017 until early 2018.
Is there any kind of website or video that people can see what the exhibition looked like?
On my website, in the section that's for the Paul Williams work, there is a section that includes exhibition photographs from WUHO. So you can kind of recreate this original exhibition in your mind through looking at these photographs.
Tell us your website.
My website is just my name, Janna Ireland, Janna, Ireland, just like the country, IRELAND.com.
I remember from when we first started talking a few years ago, you gave me the mnemonic, Janna like Donna, and I have never forgotten that one.
Not Joanna, not I get
not
lots
Hannah.
of different mispronunciations. Not Hannah.
Danita, on a different coast, you worked for a time with Harvey Gantt, who basically had to fight his way into Clemson to get admitted in 1963 for school. What was that like in working with Harvey?
Well, it was really, he is my mentor, and it's just really interesting how I was introduced to him. I was a student at Clemson, and the then dean of the School of Architecture, Harlan McClure, I was graduating. I guess I was one of the only African-American students in my class after 5 others decided that they were going to choose a different path. And he introduced me to Harvey Gantt. And I had known of Harvey, but I didn't really know him. And so I had a chance to go to Charlotte and have a conversation with him. And he hired me, and he mentored me as a young person coming out of undergraduate school of what it means to be an architect, what it means to serve in the community, what it means to use our skills for the betterment of our neighborhoods and communities, and to build buildings that serve purposes. So it was really quite remarkable. And as you mentioned earlier, he also ran for civic offices in the city of Charlotte as well as the state after a period of time. But
he was mayor, wasn't he?
He showed how he was a 2-term mayor.
Yeah.
And he also ran for state senate unsuccessfully, but he made a very good impact on that race. But he showed how architects can be involved in community development and community life. So I learned a lot with him.
Were you there at his firm during the Senate campaign, the notorious one where he was fighting Jesse Helms?
No, I was in Atlanta during that time. That was after 1990 when I left Charlotte and moved to Atlanta. But I followed it very closely. And, just in talking with some of my colleagues who, worked in the office at that time, that was an interesting time for the firm.
I bet. It must be hard it's hard enough to run a firm, but to run a Senate campaign on top of that.
Well, Harvey's an amazing person. He was able to navigate all of that because he saw the coherence in both. They were not separate things. They both dealt with, improving the community life and contributing to community development.
Janna, when you were working on your exhibition, your installation, was there a book in mind then, or did that come afterwards?
I've made books all my life, so in the back of my mind, there's always the idea that a project could be a book one day, but it was just sort of like, let's see what happens with this. And the fact that there is a book now that's coming out is still sort of a surprise to me. I thought it would take a lot longer for someone to become interested in making a book about my work.
Is this your first book?
It is my first book that's not something that I made by myself. It's my first published book that had other people involved in the production.
Tell us about the book. Tell us the kinds of sites that you visited and photographed.
I tried to visit a wide variety of structures that Paul Williams designed. So most of his body of work is private homes, and those homes range from houses that were supposed to be very affordable to houses that were extremely expensive and extravagant. So I tried to get homes that were on both ends of the scale as well as in the middle. And I tried to get buildings that the public had access to as well. So I got some churches, mausoleum that's really fantastic, buildings on school campuses, for example, and just tried to get sort of a sampling of what he did and what he was capable of doing. Even before the book project came about and after that exhibition ended, there was sort of a period where I was just working on it myself because I was compelled to do it with no particular goal in mind. I just wanted to keep doing it and wanted to keep recording his contributions, particularly his contributions to Los Angeles, where he lived his whole life.
Paul Williams was known for many things, but one interesting habit he had to develop was the ability to write and draw upside down, right?
Whoa.
Yes, he did teach himself how to do that, and it was something that he could use to assist him in getting work from potential clients who were uncomfortable with or actively hostile to him because he was Black. So a lot of his clientele were wealthy white people who'd never sat across the table or sat next to a Black man before. So what this skill allowed him to do was stay on his side of a table so that he could draw for them and show them what he could do for them without getting physically closer to them.
That is amazing.
And it's something that he's well known for.
Yes, I've read that Paul learned that habit, and it really became something of a marketing piece for him after a time, because he could use it when people were uncomfortable in front of him, but he could also use it as a way to kind of dazzle people with his ability to put ideas together on paper so quickly and to capture people's ideas just, in a minute.
Absolutely. It was definitely a marketing thing as well, and probably something that people talked about amongst themselves when, say, someone asked, who designed your house? And the homeowner recommended their architect.
Janna, I know that one of the most common photos that is seen of Paul Williams is his standing in front of the Los Angeles airport. But I understand that he really didn't design that building at all. He was only kind of background involved with some master planning for the facility.
Yes, there is a famous Julia Schulman photograph of Paul Williams kind of in the bottom right corner of a photograph with the LAX theme building behind him. And the story I've heard is that they were at LAX one day, I guess, photographing some of the general work that had been done in this big master plan project. And Schulman asked Paul R. Williams to stand in front of the theme building, and Williams said, I don't want people to think that I designed this. Are you sure this is okay? And Schulman said, oh, yeah, it'll be fine. And then, of course, that's what everybody thinks. And it's a really common misconception that he designed that structure.
It's just everywhere you look. They're mentioning Paul Williams and the theme building.
Right.
It is. And it's something that I have to talk to people a lot about, and something that was a misconception I had for a very long time, even working on my own project.
Do you think Julia Schulman had a little hidden agenda here to try and bestow a little credit on Paul? Or was it just sort of, I need a little foreground interest in this picture?
I think that I think as a photographer, he thought this person is involved in this project, and let's get some humanity into this photograph. Let's put a person in with this structure.
Danita, back in 1963, Harvey Gantt, he had the National Guard involved in getting into Clemson. When you came along later, what was your experience of being in the school, and how had Clemson changed over those years?
Well, Clemson, when it integrated its school by Harvey Gantt, it really was one of the most peaceful integrations compared to the University of Alabama. Because the president at that time, Edwards, said he was going to make this a way that it wasn't going to be a violent spectacle of Harvey Gantt entering the school. So 1963, that's how it was. And then during that time, he was segregated in his own dorm room. He had other things that he had to do to navigate through the school. When I arrived there, it was 1979, and we were less than 1% in terms of students of color. We were less than 1% of the population. But, my story is quite interesting, and it may be Harvey's aligned with it, and those who strike a path to do what they want to do, what they love and want to aspire to become. I was so focused on my work. I was focused on striving to become an architect, to learn as much as I can. I was exposed to it in high school through a drafting professor, taking a drafting course. There were not architects in my community and my family that I could go and talk with. I didn't grow up wanting to be an architect, but that class in high school inspired me. And so it's a different experience. I think when I reflect back on it now, at the time I was into my studies. I was into doing that, and I was focused. When I reflect on it and I think about some of the nuances of things that I had to do and experience as a person of color, it was like, oh, okay, I went through that. And I think about it now, and it makes me reflect on how people of color really have to navigate the overt and the covert forms of racism in every aspect of our life, even in a classroom where we're judged by our capabilities and our talent.
Did you feel as if you had to be twice as good as the white students?
I felt that I had to be exceptional, and that my products had to be beyond reproach. I felt as though I had to be exceptional. And I had a couple of professors that helped me in that regard, and some that hindered me too, but some that really helped me by their criticism, their critique, by giving me confidence that I could do this. And for me, architecture is a practice. People always say, I practice architecture. And that's what I was doing. I wouldn't say I was the best drawer. I wouldn't say I was the best illustrator. But conceptually, I could envision three-dimensional space. I had a creative thought process, and that helped me navigate through the school.
And that started with your high school drafting teacher? Is that right?
Yes. I was reflecting on what attracted me to this. My parents, when people ask who I am, I say, well, I'm the daughter of James and Sarah Brown. Because the decision that they made shaped me. And they always, it was me and three other siblings that choose professions that will help advance, that can carry forth an ever-advancing civilization. And so people need food, they need health care, they need housing, they need shelter. And so I chose architecture because we need places that inspire us. Everyone needs good, inspiring space to create. When we look historically at advancements in our civilization, there are these buildings that became these backdrops, that became these hubs for activities and advancement and thinking and protection and shelter. And so I chose the profession because to me that was one way that I could, through my creativity, contribute to an ever-advancing civilization.
Sounds like an architect to me.
Janna, in addition to this new book on Paul Williams, you also have had pieces at the California African American Museum. Specifically, their exhibit called Sanctuary features some recent works which explore the concepts of safety and refuge as they relate to the Black experience. Tell us about that exhibition and if there's any carryover to how you curated your book on Paul Williams.
I have two pieces in Sanctuary. One is from the time I was in graduate school. I think it was from 2012. And another that I just made earlier this year, which is a sort of ready-made sculpture with a little picture frame and a cake knife and a cake plate. And this show was actually my first museum exhibition, my first time being in a show at a museum. And it opened a few days after everything shut down in March. So it's still there, and it's my first museum show, but no one has seen it.
Oh,
so,
are they going to hold it over?
I don't know how much longer they can hold it open. I mean, it's still there now, But at a certain point, I think it'll become too disruptive to the calendar to not be able to get into some things that they also have planned and that are now being delayed. So we'll just see what happens. I mean, I still get the feeling, and I have some pictures from it, but it's there in this empty museum, and I haven't seen it, and I'm a little sad about that, but also just proud to have been able to do it.
Yeah.
Janna, you and I have been tracking Paul Williams for some years now, and our research staff is turning up houses that have been off the radar by Williams just because they have been neglected or they've changed hand many times. Did you discover any houses that nobody knew about as you were running around looking for them?
I have not yet. Your research has been really fantastic as I've been doing my research, but a big missing piece of the puzzle has now kind of come into play, and that is his own archives, which have just been acquired by USC and the Getty Research Institute. So there is potential for that kind of discovery for people who have an opportunity to look through those archives, and that's something that's incredibly exciting for me.
Did you have access to those when you were putting together the exhibition?
I did not. So much of it was word of mouth, was the little bit that I could find in books. There's not very much so far. I think that'll change once people have gotten into the archives. Through research that I did online, as I said, your site was incredibly helpful because you have done so much of that vetting through looking at real estate listings and just through talking to people.
Well, the word on the street was for decades that all Paul Williams records were lost in the Watts riots, but that's not true, is it?
It's not true. He designed a building for the Broadway Federal Savings and Loan Bank, which was one of his daughter's husbands ran this bank. And when everything burned in certain neighborhoods in Los Angeles in 1992, this building burned down, and it had all of his office papers in it. So it had a lot of his correspondence. And what people thought was that everything was lost, that all of his drawings, everything that he'd done was lost. But it turns out that it was all safely in the care of his family all this time.
That's amazing. That's kind of like a Raiders of the Lost Ark story.
Right.
It's in the secret warehouse somewhere.
Yeah. So I've been hearing forever that maybe there was something that was saved, and now the opportunity to actually see what's in there has come up.
How long has he been gone? I mean, when did he die?
He died in 1980, so it's been quite a long time. He's been gone for 40 years, and It's been almost 50 years since he stopped practicing.
Danita, I have a question for you. I was intrigued by something you've been involved with, the Reconstruction Era National Monument, created by the executive order of President Obama in 2017, includes some buildings associated with Baha'i gatherings in the South. First of all, what is the Reconstruction Era National Monument? And secondly, what are the Baha'i?
Yeah, I had a chance when I was working with the National Park Service to serve as the second acting superintendent for this new National Park unit, Reconstruction Era National Monument, which is now National Park. And at that time, President Obama used the Antiquities Act to really stand up this park that told the story, the history of the Reconstruction era. And Beaufort, South Carolina was one of those places in the country that pretty much had all elements of this part of American history. So that's why it was settled. It was determined by historians and scholars that this would be the best place for the park. And the park consists of many partners, one being Penn Center. And Penn Center is located on the island of St. Helena, maybe just over the bridge, over the river from the city of Beaufort, which is a National Historic District. And its connection with Reconstruction era is where, in the South, January 1st, 1863 was where the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation took place. And Penn Center was one of those places where all these new African Americans, newly freed enslaved Africans, now African Americans, are in need of education, in need of ways to really form community life. And so Penn School was formed, and it evolved into Penn Center. So that was around 1863, 4, that school started to form. That was kind of the first civil rights movement in the South, in the country, Reconstruction era. And I believe it was something that would have succeeded if it wasn't sabotaged. That's just my opinion about it. Then you have the modern civil rights movement. Around the early 1960s, late 50s, early 1960s, where Dr. King and his lieutenants would meet at Penn Center because they were an interracial group of people. Dr. King actually was assassinated before he could occupy a home that was built for him on the Penn Center campus by the river. It allowed him a place of seclusion and reflection, but he was assassinated before he could occupy it. Also during this time, you had a faith community of the Baha'i faith in the South. The Baha'i faith is a world religion, and Baha'is believe, and I'm a member of the Baha'i faith, we believe that, there's one God, there's one religion that comes through a series of progressive revelation, and that this is a time for the unity and the oneness of mankind. And it began in 1863 in Persia, at that time, which is now Iran, but then, was banished and spread across the world. So you had a population of people from different faith communities that became Baha'is who were interracial, and they could not meet anywhere else in the South other than Penn School. Penn Center was one of those places that allowed for interracial gatherings. You had Jim Crow laws that prohibited people of different races from coming together because segregation was the law of the land in the South. So the Baha'i community was able to come together to worship, to do community activities together, to share these teachings about the oneness of humanity, unity and diversity. And so that's the connection. It was really amazing for me. As coming from a Baha'i family, my parents became Baha'is in the late 50s, early 60s, for me to be able to serve as a superintendent of a park where, my family would go to Penn Center and as a child and spend time there. So it was really a nice experience and reflective about, where we as a country are going and moving to acknowledge this part of American history.
Now, is this Reconstruction Park a place where people can visit when there's not a global epidemic going on?
Oh, certainly, yes. The National Park Service, I was responsible for standing up, and, there's a building, it's an old firehouse that's in the National Register of Historic Places across from the Beaufort Arsenal, which is also a National Register site. You can go there. It's the visitor center for the Park Service. You can get your passport book stamped. And then it sends you out to these contiguous and non-contiguous sites that tell the story of Reconstruction. Penn Center also is a place, Brick Church, which is built by African Americans, and you have this history of during the Civil War when they would have to be up in the balcony and seated, not seen. But then down on the first floor, you had the plantation owners and those who owned enslaved Africans who were worshiping. But they wanted the enslaved people to hear the gospel. And so after the Civil War, that then became the African Brick Church. And so you have praise houses. So all these sites kind of, the Park Service has a visitor center that you can go to, and there's a map that shows sites you can go to hear the story of Reconstruction era. And Robert Smalls, his story is quite remarkable. Those stories are told through these various sites.
Janna, you've been a member of something I found fascinating. It's called the Binder of Women. Tell us about that.
The Binder of Women is an art collective. It was formed a few years ago, and I was part of sort of the second class. A friend of mine, Erin Morrison, was an original member, and she recommended me. And it is just a group of artists who are women, who identify as women, and who are, everyone has their own separate practice, but at different times we come together to do different projects. So there have been exhibitions in galleries in the past. This spring, I came up with the idea of having online exhibitions. I thought we should use this website that we pay for as a platform. Since no one can go anywhere and see anything in galleries, let's put on a show together online. So I organized that, and that was my first shot at doing some curatorial work. And that was a really exciting opportunity that I got to do from my living room.
Where does Binder of Women, that's a Mitt Romney line, isn't it?
Binder of Women. So let's see, what year is that?
The 2012?
In 2012, Mitt Romney talked about how there were binders full of women during one of the presidential debates.
Yeah, okay.
And it was
I think he was talking about people he could choose to help him out or be on his staff or something.
It's just sort of a strangely, weirdly vivid, bad descriptor.
It was just sort of so careless. And it was just like, oh, yeah, we have binders full of women, whatever. Their names don't matter.
Right,
and
file
it was something
drawers.
that he was widely mocked for. So naming the collective after that was sort of a way to joke about that, but also
make people remember.
Acknowledge that idea that there is this
resource.
That there are a lot of women doing serious work in various fields. So here is a binder full of women who are artists, mostly LA-based, doing serious work right now.
It seems like, Janna, you should get Office Depot to be your sponsor.
Or Staples.
Yeah, Staples, somebody like that.
So branded binders.
Yeah.
Right. Now, your project Home Alone Together, was that one of the online projects for the Binder of Women?
Not at all. That project was conceived by S. Billy Mandel, who's a photographer, and Aaron Rosen, who is based out in Washington. And they came up with this idea for different photographers and artists who worked in mediums that were sort of connected to photography to make work about their time in quarantine during the pandemic. So for 12 weeks this spring, I photographed around my house, and I focused on my children and their activities in this time, and just sort of the experience of being little boys and being home all the time when they used to be at school with their friends.
And where can people see this exhibition?
Online at Image Journal's website. Image Journal is sort of the home for the project, but I think it's going to have a longer life after everything. So at imagejournal.org, you can see Home Alone Together. And I was one of 25 artists who made work for this project.
That's fascinating. You know, as COVID has changed all our lives so profoundly, I suspect that you're going to get some really powerful images in this exhibition.
I have looked at the work and seen some really amazing things, and I was so happy to be able to do this work. I was so overwhelmed with suddenly the classes I'm teaching being online and also trying to manage my children 13 hours a day that I don't know at what point I would have picked up my camera, if I would have done it at all, and tried to make serious work here at home. So it gave me an opportunity to do that and have a home for it. And I'm still making pictures here at home, even though the project has officially ended.
Danita, I want to talk about another project you've been involved in. A number of years ago, you were trying to preserve the Mutual Federal Savings and Loan Building in Atlanta. Why was that building important, and what happened to it?
Well, it was important because it was part of the Sweet Auburn National Historic Landmark District. And if you may be familiar with Atlanta and, again, this period of Jim Crow segregation in the South, Auburn Avenue was considered one of the richest Black avenues in the country, particularly in the South. And so it was a combination of buildings related to economics, to industry, such banks, but also clubs, nightclubs, famous artists and musicians would come to the Royal Peacock. You also had the Mutual Savings Life Bank, but you had the insurance company, Atlanta Life Insurance, which was formed by a former slave, Alfonso Herndon. And so these collections of buildings, their scale, their proximity to each other really told the history of that piece of American history. And so Sweet Auburn National Historic Landmark District, we've been losing that history over time. And so at that time, I was serving on the city's Urban Design Commission, which was responsible for hearing applications related to historic buildings, sites, and districts, the alterations to them in the city. And when it came up where actually the owners, the Mutual Saving and Loans Bank executives, wanted to create more of a suburban bank in order to survive in 1990s, 2000s. They said Walk-Up Bank was not going to allow them to survive and to stay on Auburn Avenue, and they wanted to be able to tear down the building to build a new modern building with a drive-through. And at that time, I was not working for the National Park Service, but I knew of its significance because I knew of the history of Auburn Avenue. So I was one of the few members of the Urban Design Commission that voted against it. It did move forward because people said economics is important. We need to be able to advance our community. We cannot be held back by not being able to be viable economically. So then it came back again where there was another building the applicant wanted to tear down and to repurpose, and that was the first building, also not far from Mutual Savings, the Atlanta Daily World, first on-black newspaper in Atlanta. And I was then working for the National Park Service, and I went to the Urban Design Commission. I told my experience, my story of losing Mutual Savings and Loan Bank. Do not repeat that, in my opinion. And so what happened, that building got retained, and it's been repurposed into a coffee shop and to other spaces. So our history is important. Buildings are a reflection of that, and we have to speak for them.
That's great. I'm so glad that one got saved.
Yes.
Janna, when you were shooting the buildings for your book, I know you were doing mostly houses, but what kind of commercial structures did you find that were designed by Paul Williams?
He did a lot of redesigns, some here in LA. Like he did a partial remodel of the Beverly Hills Hotel, and the famous logo that everyone knows is his handwriting. He designed a Saks Fifth Avenue building here, did some redesigning for that. But I was mostly interested in buildings that he did for sort of more community-minded purposes. So I photographed several churches and a mausoleum at a cemetery here. I wanted to look at buildings that he designed that were for people, but not necessarily commercial, for large numbers of people versus for a single family.
Did you get out to the Neon Museum?
I did. I had a chance to go to Las Vegas. The magazine based in Atlanta, Art Papers, commissioned me to photograph some of his work in Las Vegas. So I was able to photograph the Neon Museum, which used to be the La Concha Motel. When the motel shut down, the lobby was moved to the site of the Neon Museum, and now the lobby of the museum is that structure from the motel. And I photographed Berkeley Square, which was a community that he designed for Black families living in Las Vegas, as well as the Guardian Angel Cathedral in Las Vegas. So that was a wonderful trip and an opportunity to get out of Los Angeles and look at some of the work he'd done elsewhere.
So this is a question for both of you. Looking forward, what kinds of things need to happen to improve parity and equality in architecture between Black and white practitioners?
Well, I'll start. I think that, when I think about, who are the protagonists that around this issue of race, it's individuals, it's the community organizations, and it's institutions on a national level, that each one has their way of addressing this lack of disparity and improving access to even envision becoming an architect and serving this profession, which is broad in many ways. So I think the individuals, we could start to create, as Janna mentioned, create societies and create organizations that allow for individuals to have conversations together, to work together, and to think about ways of collaborating. And I think in communities just turning to people of color to provide services, to look and think about what Paul Williams had to do, the adjustments he had to make to even be considered for a project, be considered for a commission to make that adjustment. But now we are, I think, advanced enough that we can look to people based on their skills and qualifications to do projects. And then I think on an institutional level, our organizations, national organizations, and I think what policies are being made, we could start to think about how can we reach into higher education? How can we reach into primary education to provide access to understanding what architects do, how they contribute to our built environment, and create scholarships to allow for people to dream about the possibilities. So I think it works on many different levels, and I think it begins with each of us.
Janna, how about you? What needs to happen out there to improve this parity?
I think it's really important that stories about architects and architects who were working to serve their own communities need to be told. As a Black woman and as the mother of 2 children who were Black, I want them to know Paul Williams' story. I want them to grow up with the idea that architecture is something that is accessible to them, both as something to appreciate just on an aesthetic level and something that is possible for them to focus on and become good at and spend their life working on. Here in LA, Paul Williams designed thousands of structures, but children going through school here don't necessarily know that these buildings that they're passing every day or seeing in movies and on television were designed by a Black architect who lived long, long before they did and had to face some really incredible obstacles. So telling those stories and then, as Danita said, providing infrastructure within schools for supporting children who might be interested in this and might be good at these things. More teachers like, your teacher who taught your drafting class and directed you towards architecture.
As someone who has watched probably over 150 architecture documentaries, I can't think of one about Paul Williams, and maybe, Janna, you need to make that one.
There is one. It's called Hollywood's Architect, and it was something that was worked on for years and years by Royal Kennedy Rogers here in LA and was finally released by PBS earlier this year.
Oh,
I saw that. Mm-hmm.
So right as I began, this documentary has been in the works for a long time, but right as I began my work, he got the AIA gold medal, and more people are talking about him. So
right. He got the gold medal. You found his archives. The PBS special came out. Maybe Paul Williams' next year is coming up.
I think that a next step, and it's something that people are interested in doing, is a film about him, a narrative theatrical film.
Yes.
I've heard a couple people say, can you put me in touch with his family? I want to talk to them about this idea. And maybe that's the next thing. Who knows? If it does happen, I hope that it gets a treatment that is accurate and not the Green Book treatment.
Yeah.
Right. Janna, Danita, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Mine as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for Modernist Houses. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 7,500 significant modernist houses, and access 3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Carrie Cesarino researches guests while juggling 2 above-average screaming children, a flaming sword, and a bottle of Dom Perignon 1963. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.